Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Feed and Focus for Remote Work and Digital Nomads podcast. My name is Angela Sharina. I'm a certified health, nutrition, brain performance coach, but that's not important. What's important, guys, is that today is Monday. It's a new beginning. It might be morning like it is for me here in Playa del Carmen in Mexico. And I want you to think about one simple thing today. Well, first of all, beginnings, the start of anything, the mornings, the first moments, this is my favorite part of anything. And one might say this is where the most joy is, because our brain loves novelty and starting and beginning. And I want you to think about beginnings and starting new things. It probably feels light and helps you to feel fresher and inspired and more motivated. I think a lot of you guys don't think a lot about the fact that you can start again at any time of the year, of the month, of the week, of the day. All it takes is a mindset shift. Some things in the past might not have exactly worked out. You might have some not so positive emotions or experiences. But guess what, guys? You survived them, you lived through them, and you can learn from them and bring that experience back to your life today and start anew, no matter what day, what time it is. With all that experience, start again, start better, inspired and motivated to move forward. So begin again. It doesn't matter where you are, what you have, you can always begin again and better. You lived through a lot of things, so I'm sure you have a lot of experience and lessons that you can bring into this moment to begin again, but this time better. Besides hopefully giving you inspiration and motivation to begin and start this Monday with a smile on your face, besides all of that, I have an amazing guest for you guys today. I did not expect this interview to go so well, to learn so much, and to be delivering so much value to all of you. Today, on this podcast on Feed and Focus for Remote Work and Digital Nomads, we have Dr. Tricia Berry. She's an Associate Dean and Director of Clinical and Practical Programs for Purdue University Global. She holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Education with a specialization in Organizational Leadership from North Central University, a Master of Arts in Teaching and Learning from Kaplan University, now Purdue Global, and Bachelor's degree in both Occupational Therapy and Psychology from St. Ambrose University. She is also Certified Diversity and Inclusion Specialist through the Academy to Innovate HR. Trish has a lot more of all kind of certifications, guys, and degrees that all of this you can read in the show notes. But I think what's very important about what Trish has to bring to this episode is that experience that she has from working with people remotely for more than 16 years. She's been working with people for much longer than that, but 16 years being her official remote work experience. And she's just full of that practical knowledge of how to lead yourself, to lead people through this remote world of work, through the pandemic, through all the intricacies that comes with that, from communication, from person to person when you can't see that person, communication in the family when everyone is at home and you still gotta get your work done, and keeping yourself healthy and fit mentally and physically. Tricia has so much experience and knowledge that she so generously shared on this podcast. So read through the show notes, realize how much goodness and gold Tricia brought to this podcast today. Tune in, stay till the very end, take notes, guys, and then most importantly, use it in your remote work, from writing emails to talking with people, your coworkers, or perhaps the team that you lead, from talking to your family members about different boundaries, physical and psychological, so everyone gets to live a great life and also get the work done or studies done, right? Maybe you have kids or you're studying yourself at the moment. I just can't put all the goodness, all the practical value that Tricia brought to this podcast in this intro. So without further ado, please tune in. And of course, at the end of the episode, Tricia will give you the best way to connect with her. So please do use it and ask all the questions that you have, maybe additional questions that we haven't covered on this podcast. Maybe you connect with Tricia to bring her experience to, your team or somewhere else. There are so many opportunities, right? So learn, take notes, practice, and connect. Without further ado, please enjoy. Tricia, welcome to Fit and Focused for Remote Work and Digital Nomads podcast. I'm very happy that you are here because I don't actually talk to a lot of people in education for one reason or the other, right? And I'm curious to know, how is your remote journey, right? That seems to be a long one. So welcome to the show. Thank you, Tricia, for sharing your story and your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and I'm sure, all of the listeners like myself are curious to know. You work remotely, if I count correctly, for 16 years. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. So, and you are in higher education. So tell our listeners and myself a little bit more about what it is you do and how you do it remotely.
Yeah, so I work for an institution that is a 100% online institution, and we have been for quite some time, even before I joined the organization. It's been 100% online. So we do everything online. We don't have face-to-face contact with our students. All of our classes are online, and then everything that we do parallel to support the student is online.
You never had it? You never had physical? No.
No, well, not. So there had been a couple different divisions of our university, and there were some places that were face-to-face. Mm-hmm. I actually started with the institution teaching in face-to-face classes on the campus, and then rolled over to the online side about 16 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I have been on the online side ever since. Those face-to-face locations no longer exist. We just do everything online now. Okay. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about, maybe also about field of study? Is it, everything from, mathematics to languages? I'm not sure, again, what's happening in different universities at the moment. And how do you teach it online? How do you find teaching experience only online? Yeah, that's a great question. So our institution actually has 6 different schools, and we have a broad array of things, all the way from social and behavioral science type programs through health sciences, nursing. We have business and IT. We also even have a law school. So we have a broad array of things. Our institution caters to working adults. So our entire gig is designing programs that are going to be friendly for the working adults. So you're probably in our institution. Well, I know it's not probably. I know you're not going to find things like humanities or things like degrees and those kinds of things, because really our degrees are very focused on career type goals and things that working adults would want. So it's a broad array of things. How we teach online is an interesting question. That has changed tremendously. When I started with the online institution 16 years ago, we had chat rooms that you could only type. You couldn't talk to people. We did everything by email and by typing in chat rooms. And most of our online classes even were just static pages that students would read, and they would read their textbooks. And then we had discussion boards where they could talk back and forth, sort of like a Facebook feed kind of thing, where they talk about different topics and whatnot. and now the world is so, so different. So when I started 16 years ago, smartphones were sort of just beginning. We all had Blackberries. That was the thing. They were so cool. But we didn't all have computers in our pocket, even 16 years ago. So things have changed dramatically. And, it's really only been in the last 4 or 5 years that the video technology has come around. That we can have videos. And then with all of the other softwares that have developed simulations and virtual reality and all of those kinds of things, there are so many things that you can do to create dynamic learning experiences for students when they're in the online classroom. And we know from academic research, people don't learn by just reading something.
Yes.
In order to learn, you have to actively engage with the material. And typically what you want to do is create some kind of an emotional response from the person, because that helps to encode that into the brain and helps them to digest the information. And so we really like to focus on active type activities and all of the simulations that you can do, and web field trips where students can go out and experience things. And I won't say that there's no reading, because all academics, there's part of it is reading, but then we also focus on really engaging the students and interacting with them as well in order to promote learning.
I'm just curious. You mentioned like virtual reality, etc. Do you actually use that? I think because just a lot of people, it's interesting, how many ways there is to learn.
Yeah, we have started using. So my direct role is in School of Health Sciences, and we actually have been piloting some virtual reality. Virtual reality is really big in nursing programs and things like that as well. I would say that it's one of those things that we're kind of past our toes. Maybe we've got our foot in the water, we're not all the way in yet, but we're going in slowly. And it definitely is the way of the future and things that are going to happen. And it's hard when we say virtual reality, because that means a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people. But simulated learning, immersive learning, things where people can not be in the environment, but still have the experience that you might have if you were in the environment. So and healthcare is a great way to think about it. If you think about a surgeon doing surgery, boy, if they could practice with virtual tools and get the feel of what things are going to be and have an idea of what they're going to see when they open someone up and things like that, that seems like it'd be way better than just cutting somebody open for the first time and taking a look. And that extends to tons and tons of skills in healthcare. And so being able to do those kinds of things helps people learn, and then you can transfer that learning into the real world situations.
And I think, that doesn't just apply to education. It applies to work so much. Like, people kind of now getting used to Zoom idea, but I think there are also so many better ways coming to interact and work together on projects, because there's only so much, right, you can do by looking at a person and talking to them. And there are so many more ways to interact, again, as you said, in those like simulated environments. So that's, I'm very excited about that. And you mentioned field trips. Do you actually go out, or you mean field trips like virtual field trips?
Yeah, so a little bit of everything. In our normal courses, we can build in virtual field trips. So let's say in a health course, we want to review Center for Disease Control requirements for something. So we can go to the CDC website and have people investigate that and take a look at it. There are so many cool things that you can even tour and stuff online these days. You can go look at things. So those are what like a web field trip would be, is going out to a site and looking at it and discussing it as a group while you're in your course seminar or your class. We also do a lot with having students go out. So my particular role, part of it is to oversee clinicals for all of our health sciences students. So we actually have them going out to clinical sites to perform what they need for their profession. And then they bring that back and talk to us about it in the classroom. Now, there's a whole bunch that goes into that, right? They don't just show up at Dr. Smith's office and go in and work on patients. There's all kinds of legal things, and we prep them for it. And just like a clinical that you would if you were at a traditional school, face-to-face campus. We also have things that we're expanding into, things like service learning, where if they're doing volunteering, in their communities, they can come back and incorporate that in the university to earn some recognition for that. And one of the very coolest things we just started this year is an education abroad program. And this was actually started by our School of Business and a faculty member in that school. We took a group of students last spring to London and learned all about business and how business works in London, and had a great experience. And we're expanding those programs now. We will be doing trips in our School of Health Sciences as well. I'll be taking a group of students to London next spring, and then we're planning trips a couple of times a year. So we are trying to create experiences for, even though our online students are all over the world, potentially, mostly in the United States, but we have some outside of the United States as well, that we can take them to a place and have those cultural experiences and that cultural immersion where you get really, really deep learning and also understanding of the world around us. Because as you've pointed out, the world's gotten smaller, right?
Yes.
England and the UK and Europe don't seem quite as far away as they did 10 or 15 years ago. And so everything's so interconnected. If we can help students see those connections and have those experiences and appreciate maybe other perspectives from their own, out of their own country, we know that we're doing good things for helping them through their learning pathways.
Yeah. And, there are actually two things. People think that remote work actually separates us and makes us more distant from each other because we don't actually show up, at the same location to do our work. But actually, in so many ways, it connects us. Because now with that intention of learning a specific field, for example, right, in your industry, people from all over the world literally can come together, can study something, produce maybe in one country, but then maybe there are modules from other countries, and then they can go to a third country, to explore their culture or how the business works and get together there and also exchange their cultural background and what they learned maybe from their background in their country, right? So, yeah, I mean, remote world can at some capacity distance that, but it also can bring the whole world together and make it so much smaller, right? And it's beautiful that you pointed out that remote work, it doesn't have to be again Zooming, or emailing. It actually can be a lot more things. You can help people to interact with their environment and bring that back to the studies, and then just having so many different modalities. So I love it. But at the same time, you mentioned that your work is remote. Well, most of the time, right? You still, as you mentioned, you took people to London. So it's kind of it's just not office work, but you do still people, right? And I think that's beautiful. So can you tell maybe people a little bit more about your remote work experience? It's been 16 years, but how was that? How's your day usually look like? And also other days, when you do your field trips, or maybe there are some other also modalities of your work?
Yeah, my day usually, I'm a routine. I'm a creature of habit. So I like to have kind of a routine. And obviously, my husband's getting up and going to work in the morning too. So we sort of have, we sort of follow a routine. I mean, I get up in the morning, I work out, I clean up, and then I sit down and work. I am fortunate enough in my house that I have a dedicated office. That's kind of separated. When I started working at home, we actually finished our basement and built what my husband calls my cave in the basement. And it literally is more like a hallway than an office, but it's where I have always worked, and all my work stuff is down here. And my kids, when they were younger, they knew if I was in here, I was working, and they could only bug me if they were bleeding or dying or someone else was bleeding or dying. Right. And even my kids' friends, because I've worked from home since my youngest was in kindergarten. So even my kids' friends knew if they were over after school or something, their mom's working, and so we can't go down there, or we can only go down there if something crazy is happening and we really need an adult. And they also knew, the kids' friends knew when they were here and playing here, if they were down here in the basement, they just didn't come in this room. And that was just the rule, and they knew that. So we're fortunate enough to be able to sort of structure our house so that I could be away from everybody when I was working, and they could be away from me when I was working, because that was sometimes nice for them as well. And then, I work all day, just like everybody else does, 8 to 5, 7 to 6, 8 to 8, whatever I need to do. I do try to really be careful about keeping balance, because I do think one of the hard things about remote work is it's easy to get sucked in.
Yeah.
And, you'll be working on something and all of a sudden 2 hours have gone by and you don't even realize, that the rest of your family's already had dinner and moved on with their lives. So I do try to really structure my day so that most of my working hours are between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Not always. I mean, because we meet with students and faculty, sometimes I do some evening things, but then if I'm doing that, then I usually start later in the day or go out to lunch with somebody during the day or something. I really think that remote work to some extent can't be so much time focused as task focused. You have things you have to get done and you get those done. We have this concept, particularly in the United States, but I think in other places too, like you're not working if you haven't been someplace 40 hours a week. And I subscribe to that philosophy some, because we all have things we have to get done and be accountable for. And as I'm designing jobs for people who report to me, I have to sort of think about that 40 hours, what's realistic for people to do in 40 hours. But also if I have job tasks for the week and I've gotten them all done in 35 hours and I want to knock off early on Friday afternoon, whatever, because probably a week later, I'm going to have something that takes me more like 45 or 50 hours. And so I'm not going to have that opportunity. And I think that's where remote work gives us a lot of flexibility, that we can sort of work around things. I think there's a huge advantage too, if you've got family situations. I've had times where folks in my family have been sick and I could be at the hospital with them, but still be working. My dad had a surgery at one point and I sat in the hospital and worked the whole time because there wasn't really anything I could do to help him, but we couldn't really just leave him there either. So I think there's all of those benefits that we gain from remote work, but we also have to be careful about setting those personal boundaries and knowing when to say, okay, it's not a good day. I'm going to be at the hospital with my family and I'm not going to be working at this point. Yeah. So setting those boundaries, being comfortable with it, I think is important. And then also, if you're someone who's a manager, trusting your people and supporting them and being conscientious about letting them have those boundaries. Because I've had supervisors over time that didn't allow boundaries. And I would be on vacation or I'd be off or something and they'd call me and we need this and we need it right away. And I don't think we should do that to people. Just because they work remotely doesn't mean they don't get some space. So trying to be really respectful of that, not only for yourself, but then also for any employees and folks that report up to you too, I think is super important.
Yeah, I think, maybe at some point we'll develop a better system of managing those boundaries, maybe like, login system, like you only can log in and do your work at certain hours and the rest kind of you're off limits, right? Or something like that. But also, of course, as you mentioned, it is important to also yourself develop those boundaries. Yes, these are the hours I work and these are the hours I live, with family or doing some other things. It is very important. A great thing about what you explained is you have this very beautiful structure with zoning. You have your office, like this is where I work, this is where I go to work. And then the rest of the house is where I live. I think that's, zoning places is one of the most powerful things that anyone can do. Although, personally, with like when you're digital nomads, you don't always have that. But, how I manage it, it's like I do things in one space, right? If I sit here and I do my podcast, this is the only space I do it, right? In my bedroom, I don't do any of that. And there is a special place where I eat and in hours, the same thing, I do like from this time to this time I work. And then if I don't manage to accomplish certain tasks, I'm like, well, I needed more time. I'm going to do it tomorrow and plan better for the next time, right? So that's been like also my way of managing that. Do you have any tips? Maybe something that you recommend to your students because they are working adults. Do you have some tips or tools to set those boundaries better besides, maybe having zoning? Maybe some people don't have the opportunity, to build their office or maybe you, again, came across some struggles that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, I think because not everybody does, to your point, if you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment, you may not have a place that you can zone, or if you're house is busting at the seams with family members everywhere. You may not be able to do that kind of thing. I think being able to, especially if you live with other folks, being able to talk that through and kind of agree to certain boundaries for things. So and my husband, during the pandemic, my husband had to work from home and my kids were both home for school too. And so when dad was in this room at this desk, these were his work hours and we couldn't bother him. And, we had to be quiet and remember that he's working, even though we're next door in the kitchen making dinner or whatever. But I think that was something that we had to come to an agreement as a family, because, our kids were old enough, they were both in college at the time, so we could do that. But having some agreement on what those boundaries are among the people that you live with, or just setting that physical presence for yourself. If you've got to work at your kitchen table and you've got to set yourself up and take it down every day, okay, I've set this up. This is my work time. My work time's over at whatever o'clock, or when I get this task done, and then I'm going to move it off and it won't be my work time anymore. I think physical boundaries are important to help create psychological boundaries.
Yeah.
So that you don't keep getting sucked into things. And I always tell, when I hire new employees, I tell them, don't be afraid to tell me you need some work-life balance, or don't be afraid to tell me if you're overwhelmed. One of the hard things about transitioning into remote work is that most employees, especially if they're brand new to remote, they want to make sure that people know they're doing their job. And they get very worried about, how do people know I'm getting my work done? And I always tell them, if you're getting all the tasks I assigned to you done, I know you're getting your work done. I don't have to see you at certain times to know that you're getting your work done. But coaching them on that, and then coaching, I think, new employees too, on if there's something that's not quite right or not feeling right to you, then talk to whoever you report to or whoever your supervisor is about that. Because and it's better now that we have video, but oftentimes with remote work, as a manager, if one of my people is angry about something or upset about something, I don't know it until they tell me, because I'm not seeing them sitting in their office sulking or snapping at people or, whatever you would do in a face-to-face environment. So that one of the things that I always tell new employees, and I tell people who are transitioning, is just be really open about that. I mean, be professional and appropriate, but if you've got something going on, you've got to be able to share that with either your manager or the folks around you, because otherwise they have no idea of what's happening and they don't know how to help you and support you. So that open communication is critical.
I also, I'm curious about that open communication. I talk to a lot of people, sometimes business owners, sometimes managers in the space, and they tell me the same thing, that they ask people to share. To what I, sometimes think that maybe people are not always comfortable with sharing with a professional supervisor, but they might be more comfortable with someone like, I don't know, some sort of psychologist or a coach or someone like that. Do you think that could be a solution for some people, some companies? Do you have a struggle with that, or wonder if people are always comfortable sharing what they're actually experiencing? Because sometimes I also think, that people might be afraid, well, if I say that, they might think I'm not effective, and, it might affect my work.
So my advice to people on that is, if they're in that situation and they're not comfortable talking to their manager, to find somebody they can talk to. I think it would be different for every person. Sometimes it might be a coworker or somebody else that you're working with. Sometimes it might be a spouse, even just to share those kinds of things. But I mean, we know from tons of research, if people keep stuff bottled up and they can't talk about it, then that comes out at some point. And I would challenge people who are managers to make sure they're creating an environment that people can be open. We know from research with virtual teams that the single greatest influence on a virtual employee's experience is their manager. And their perception of the organization and the work they do is largely driven from their manager and what their manager communicates and how they communicate. So I think with virtual teams, even more so than face-to-face teams, how we approach people as managers and how we lead is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any tools for managers, to create this kind of environment where people are comfortable to share, like maybe the way they communicate or set up communication, or maybe, some specific tools that you found useful, be there online or some other way?
Two things I would say to that. First of all is making sure when situations come up that you get detailed information about the situation and that you get all perspectives on a situation before you rush to judgment. So one of the things that happens a lot in a remote environment is you get a piece of information, but there's much more to the picture. You've only got a piece of the puzzle. You don't have the whole puzzle. And once you start digging in and you get the whole puzzle, all of a sudden the perspective on that piece changes. Mm-hmm. So, and I can use my examples since I'm in education, I'll get a student who sends me an email complaining about one of my staff. This person did this to me and they're trying to keep me from graduating and those kinds of things. I never, ever take the student's word for what's happened, right? I always go back, I look at documentation. I ask the staff member, hey, have you had some interactions with this student? Tell me about that. What's going on? Mm-hmm. So I think that being intentional about not reacting to things and gathering information so that you get the biggest picture you can. We're never going to have a perfect picture, but at least you can get a better picture of that. And then the other technique that I firmly believe in is more of a bottom-up leadership style. So if I have a one-on-one meeting with one of my staff, sometimes I have things I need to talk to them about because that's what I have to do as a manager. But I always start with, what do you need from me? Mm-hmm. What do you have that you need to talk to me about? And I try to let them drive those meetings. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there are times where I have to share things as well. But I really try to let the employee have the control and let me know what they need. And then when they do share, I think it's critical to not overreact and to not get engaged. Sometimes it's a trick for psychologists, right? You just have to sit and listen and take it all in, even if you don't like it, even if it's making you angry, but sit, listen, take it in, process it, and then figure out how to have a productive conversation about it. We know in virtual relationships that once you lose trust, it's 10 times harder to get it back. Mm-hmm. We also know that if you're going to work productive virtually, then you have to be able to trust one another. Yeah. So it's this continual process of thinking about, if I do this or say this to this employee, how is that going to impact the trust? Mm-hmm. Or if this employee hears me say this to another employee, how is that going to impact the trust with both of them? And how do I do this in a way that I can maintain trust and maintain a positive relationship but still get my point across?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just a lot of, I guess, communication and really like being there for people to hear what they have to say, like their concerns and the whole message. On the toolkit, side of things, do you use Zoom or you use other maybe environments or chats, or how does it usually happen?
So our standard is Google Meet. And we use that for the majority of our stuff. We do have access to other tools, but we are a Google-based organization, so we do most everything in that.
Okay, yeah, cool. I just wanted to know, maybe, you use new environments or tools or things to better somehow communicate and facilitate that more trusting communication. So, yeah, thank you, for sharing this part of remote work. That I think a lot of companies struggle with that exact thing right now, be that, students and teachers or managers and employees or just team members, with that like communication. How do you facilitate that openness and that interaction and collaboration, and having, all the signals, all the data without seeing the actual person? As you mentioned, when you see someone, you kind of know when they're pissed about something, or they're just not well. While through online communication can be challenging.
Right. And I think it's also being really intentional about communication. The example I always use when I talk about this, when I do webinars for other folks, is if I say the word green, that's a pretty simple word, right? We'd all agree that's not a complex word. It's not a hard word. Even a 2-year-old probably knows the word green. But when you look at it, the word green means different things to different people, right? You think money, you think grass, you think environmentally friendly. You think about St. Patrick's Day, think about Ireland. You think about that car you had when you were in high school. So there's all these different things that even just that one simple word can mean. When we're talking with people, especially in virtual relationships, we have to be careful that we're using that language the same way. Because if I'm talking about we need a new green initiative, and what I mean is sustainability, and what my staff think is we got to figure out how to make more money, we're going to have a conflict.
Yes.
So we have to always just be really, really explicit about language and making sure that even when we're using those simple words, that we're all meaning the same thing when we use them. If you ever watch conflicts in virtual worlds, in my experience, at least probably 90% of those conflicts are because of a communication thing.
Yeah.
Because being used differently or being perceived differently. And once you get everybody on the same page, that almost always will at least de-escalate whatever the issue is, if not completely resolve it.
Yeah, I so agree. And I always like to, when I communicate virtually, I always try to check for understanding. And I always try to check, do I understand what the other person is saying? As I understand that, I think what you are saying is, and then I reflect back to them what I heard and understood. And if the person agrees, then we can continue, and if doesn't, then we have to do some work for clarification. So I think, that communication, being open, being very clear, making sure that you're clear is super important to make progress while working remotely, right? Or interacting the other way. I think, we have kind of covered a lot about the way remote work works and how it works for you. And I would like to switch gears now to more your, personal experience of remote lifestyle, right? And specifically how you maintain, we kind of touched upon like productivity and focus and zoning things and having agreements with family members. But what about you as like a person, your health, mental and physical, your fitness, your nutrition, your sleep, all around that do contribute to our experience online or remote work, right? And a lot of people who I talk to, they find it challenging, especially while transitioning. They're like, I used to have schedule and now my schedule can be all over the place. So I'm not really sure what to do when. Also the same with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like now it's kind of like all over the place. What are your, tips and tools and everything that you'd like to share?
And we've touched on a lot of that already, those physical and psychological boundaries that you need. And I think that's important. I think, one of the things I started doing early on when I was working remotely is it was when Fitbits first came out, and I got a Fitbit so I could track my activity. And I live in the Midwest where it's cold in the winter, and I didn't want to leave the house. And there were times where I was maybe taking 1,500 steps in a day because all I did was go from upstairs to downstairs and wasn't leaving the house. So I quickly came to the realization that physical activity had to be very intentional once I started working remotely, especially during those times where I'm just hanging out in the house. And all of us went through that during the pandemic, where you just aren't out doing much. For a long time, I had a treadmill desk, and I would work from my treadmill for a couple of hours every day because I could answer emails and things as I walked, even though it was slow, but I was at least moving that way. Now, as I said, I think part of, for me at least, being successful as a remote employee is setting a routine for myself so that I do have that workout time built in. For me personally, if I don't work out first thing in the morning, it's probably not going to happen because, at night you're tired and you get distracted and all of those kinds of things. And then I'm also very intentional from a health standpoint of not eating at my desk most of the time. Very, very rare that I sit and work while I'm eating, or at least eating a meal. So I try to I actually, in my schedule almost every day, just black out 30 minutes in the middle of the day where I can go upstairs in my house and make some lunch and just sit and eat. And I usually watch TV that's like mind-numbing TV and doesn't have any, cognitive capacity whatsoever. and just kind of do that. And then for me, again, in terms of being healthy, I just don't keep a lot of stuff around the house that I shouldn't eat. So if my fridge is stocked with fruits and vegetables, I'm much more likely to eat them. If the cookie jar is stocked with cookies, I'm much more likely to eat those. So I try to keep that balanced and keep the junk food and stuff out of the house, because it's hard if you're here all the time. And right there, it's easy to just grab stuff. Now, the flip side of that is I don't work in an office where people are bringing in treats every day and have candy jars on their desk and things like that too. So I think there's some give and takes to that on both sides.
But as you mentioned, I think it's very important to be conscious and intentional about that, designing that routine, when you do, what you do, and also that zoning again, having your meals at specific place, not everywhere.
Yeah. And I think that psychological separation, I very much believe that people do better in all of their life if they have balance between the other things in their life, and both our physical health and our mental health. So even during my work days, taking that 30 minutes to go have lunch, I think gives my brain a chance to reset. Maybe sometimes, depending on the day I'm having, helps me get a little perspective on something before I come back and re-engage in it. And I do think that's important. And then I think too, the cool thing is, as a remote employee too, if you need to walk away for a while, you can. So having a really crappy day and you're really angry about something or really upset about something, take a walk around the block, or, go watch mind-numbing television, or whatever it is it takes for you to sort of get away from that. I think one of the things that with health and remote work and our society in general, actually these days, is everything's fast. Send the email, reply to the text, reply to the IM. It's on and on and on and on. And stuff's coming in so fast, we feel like we have to respond quickly. But we don't always have to do that. If we get an email that upsets us, we can wait and respond the next day. You don't have to go back at it. And oftentimes, if you just take that time to set aside and step aside from something, do some other stuff, and then come back to it, whatever that situation is will look really different when you come back to it.
Yeah.
So I think knowing that in yourself and being able to set those boundaries and manage yourself. And you probably would do that in a face-to-face environment too. Like if you're getting really angry with somebody, you might say, I got to walk away. But sometimes with email, we don't do that. We just start firing stuff off.
I think actually, to be honest, with email, it should be easy. It is easy because like when you're in a conversation, sometimes you just get caught up in it, and then there is the person, it's like real time. Whereas email, it's like, people kind of know that sometimes you don't reply right away. From that perspective, I think remote work actually can help us get better at communication, right?
As long as we check ourselves and don't let ourselves get drawn in. I think the other thing that's interesting in research is it shows that in virtual communications like email, we will always assume the worst of the other person when we read the email. Okay. So you can read something that that's not intended at all the way you think it is, but we always perceive it in the worst way possible. So one of the tools, after I read that research, one of the tools I started using is when I write something, especially if I know it's a little bit of a difficult email for someone, I'll read it and think, okay, if they perceive this the worst way possible, what are they going to think? And it's amazing how if you take that approach, it will change how you word things and how you approach things, even in your email. Now, still, sometimes people are going to get mad. They just get mad. But trying to minimize that, again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier, trying to always figure out how to maintain the trust and not violate the trust, because even little violations of trust in the virtual world are harder to get past than they are in the face-to-face world. So our communications form the basis of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that reading, something, not seeing the person, not seeing their reactions and their emotions, it makes it harder to just read into the true intention of that, email or whatever that piece of communication is. What I found actually useful, a couple of things. Sometimes I do use images or, signs like a wink or something to make sure the person understands it's meant not necessarily in the worst or most serious way. And also sometimes just putting comments, somewhere like this is what I mean, or, putting a little bit of more context to like where I'm coming from with it and what's my intention. And then, when I receive something, I'm double checking. Is this what you meant? Is like, or there was something else and I just misread it.
And I think too, if we know that the tendency is when you read an email to assume the worst possible intent, then you can again check yourself when you read it and you're reacting, think, okay, wait a minute. I know Angela, she wouldn't talk to me this way. I don't think I'm taking this the right way. And you can reframe your own reaction to things.
Yeah.
And I have a coworker that says assume positive intent.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you put those glasses on and you put the positive intent glasses on, then how you perceive something can really change.
Yeah, like most things, like you said, with green, most of the things are very contextual. Like you say the same things, but you can mean like completely opposite. So that's great, to have perspective. And again, virtual world, you just want to double check. Maybe switching a little bit to mental health in general. Do you have any tools to maintain your well-being and mental health while being virtual? Because sometimes, like often actually, people feel a little bit more disconnected and a little bit more lonely, and sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. Like, and also just, I think, being in that bubble, so to speak, people often face themselves in a different way, in a more intense way. And that's why that also can add, to stress levels and just discomfort. So do you have any tools, any practices around that to maintain your mental well-being?
That is a really good question and something I've never really thought about. Nothing formal, I think. So number one, by nature, I tend to be somebody who rolls with about whatever. So I tend to not get too worked up about most things anyway. And I'm just lucky that is how I just do things. I think the physical exercise that I do on a daily basis helps. I think that, working off emotional stress with physical activity, I think is helpful. And I find, and the research shows us this too, that when you work out like that, the endorphins kick up and all of that kind of stuff. So it helps us cope a little bit better. And then the other thing I think that I use to cope, which isn't going to be helpful to anyone who's listening to this podcast, but my husband is, when I'm having a bad day, I can talk to him. Not everybody has that, and you all can't have him. I'm keeping him. But, just being able to talk things out with somebody. I do think virtual work can be isolating because you don't have friends to go to lunch with or people to just shoot the breeze with. And I'm fortunate in that I have him to do that at night, and he listens to me jabber about whatever I need to jabber about. And, so maybe if folks don't have that, if they've got a close friend or confidant that they can talk with, I think just long-term mental health, staying in touch with their own reactions and understanding how they're responding to things, and then recognizing if you're starting to get stressed and trying to deal with it sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
When we put those kinds of things off, it just compounds itself. So trying to get out ahead of it if you're finding stresses or feeling like you're pulled in too many different directions.
I think just, as you mentioned, it's just that communication, having people to share it with might be like very important. Just sometimes for people, it's not always available, you like family, obviously, if you have great family, that's amazing. That's going to solve a lot of those issues. And that's why probably, don't think that much about that. But when you're all by yourself and you went virtual, it can be a little bit isolating unless you take steps to deal with that and connect with people deeper when you need it.
I think it would be really, really challenging. And I know people who have been single and had to do that. And I can see why that's a very different thing than somebody who has spouse or a partner or roommates even, or family members around them, that if you live by yourself and you work at home, and it could wear on you really, really quickly. So then I think you have to take it upon yourself to find yourself a support system. Even if you're in a situation where you can't, like we were during the pandemic, where you can't get face to face with people, do a Zoom ladies night out, and have a glass of wine and chatter with people over Zoom or something to get yourself those connections, because most of us, the majority of us, function better when we're in community and have support from a community.
Yeah, definitely. People are still social creatures, where we work remotely or some other way. So I think it's one of the best advices. If you feel like you're disconnected, just also find people to connect with, be proactive. I think, we covered quite a lot of ground today. It's almost an hour that we've been talking. I just feel like it's been, honestly, like 10 minutes, because we've talked about so many different interesting topics and so many, tools and the way to interact better and maintain health better while working remotely, and, in all these different capacities that we now have. So coming to an end, do you have anything that you'd like to add? It can be, again, from organizing your work to your home environment to productivity, health. Like, if you have any parting thoughts, advice to share with the audience, feel free to do so now.
I think for people, they have to find the environment that's most comfortable for them. And remote work isn't for everybody. I love it. I think it's fabulous. And I cannot imagine going back to working in a place where I have to drive to an office or a school building and do that. So I think that, if folks are trying it out and it doesn't work out for them, there's no shame in that. Just like there's no shame in enjoying being in a face-to-face environment and working face-to-face. And so I think what our more digital world gives us now is more opportunity to fit things into our own lifestyle and what works for our preferences, assuming that you have an employer that allows you to do those kinds of things, or you have opportunities to do that. But I think folks just have to find where it feels comfortable for them. It's okay if they live working remotely. It's okay if they don't. If they can find something that works well for them, that's the key, I think, to them being happy and healthy.
Yeah. And I think it's the key for every area of our life, right? Something is working for you, keep doing. If something isn't working, then stop and find something else, try other things. And you're right, remote world, the way we have it now, there is more opportunity than ever to do exactly what it is fits better in your lifestyle. So yeah, I think that's one of the most important pieces of advice, or the way to think about remote world of work. So thank you, Tricia, for sharing all of this information, about remote work, about how you organize your family life, your personal life, your health routines. Is there a place you'd like people to go to connect with you? Maybe, to learn about the way you work, or something about learning environments, or connect on any other topic? Where would you like people to go?
I love to connect with people. And, you and I think connected over LinkedIn and found each other that way. I think LinkedIn's a great place. I'm Tricia Berry on LinkedIn.
And I'm going to also link that in the show notes soon.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's probably the first place to start. And then as I chat with somebody, if, we have an increased comfort level, we can share more personal information. But I think one of the fun things about all these remote tools is the people we get to connect with. Yeah. So, I've made friends from across the world just through LinkedIn and connections on LinkedIn or Facebook or things like that. And so that's really fun stuff. And I love it when people reach out. I'm always willing to chat and have conversations with folks.
Yeah, that's, beautiful thing about our virtual remote world, that we are actually getting more connected, and getting closer to each other. So again, thank you for being a part of this podcast. And I'm going to make sure to share the link and people to your LinkedIn, and people can connect with you and perhaps make new friendships and beautiful connections. So thank you again, Tricia. Really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.